We love the story of obsession. The lone genius pacing the room at 3 a.m., the artist who forgets to eat, the scientist who neglects relationships, the writer who can't stop thinking, can't stop working, can't stop chasing the thing. We've been told explicitly and implicitly that obsession is the price of greatness, that if you're not a little unhinged, a little consumed, a little self-destructive, you're probably not serious enough. But let's slow down for a second and ask a more uncomfortable question. What if obsession isn't the source of genius, but a symptom of imbalance we've romanticized? And what if some of the greatest work in human history didn't come from obsession, but survived despite it? The cultural romance with obsession. We don't just admire obsession, we reward it. We call it dedication when it produces results. We call it passion when it looks impressive. We call it vision when it wins. Only when it collapses into burnout, addiction, or breakdown do we quietly change the label. Our culture loves extremes. Balance is boring. Obsession makes a better headline. A calm, regulated person who creates consistently over decades doesn't fit the myth. There's no tragedy arc, no suffering to success montage, no dramatic transformation. So instead, we amplify the outliers, the ones who burned hot and fast, and pretend their internal chaos was a prerequisite rather than a cost. But correlation is not causation. Just because obsession and genius often coexist doesn't mean one creates the other. Obsession versus absorption, they're not the same thing. Here's where things get subtle and important. There's a huge difference between obsession and absorption, but we tend to lump them together. Obsession is narrow, compulsive, and anxious. Absorption is deep, spacious, and voluntary. Obsession feels like, I can't stop thinking about this. If I don't do this, I'm nothing. I have to prove something. I'm afraid to rest because I'll lose it. Absorption feels like, I'm fully here. Time disappears. I choose to return. I can step away and come back. One is driven by fear, the other by curiosity. One consumes you, the other meets you. And here's the quiet truth most people miss. Genius level work almost always requires absorption, but not obsession. We confuse the two because they can look similar from the outside. Both involve intensity, but both involve focus. Both involve long hours. But internally, they are completely different states. When obsession becomes identity, obsession often isn't about the work at all. It's about identity. I am my work. If this fails, I fail. If I stop, I disappear. At that point, the work becomes a psychological life raft. You're not creating because you love the process. You're creating because you're terrified of what happens if you don't. This is where imbalance creeps in unnoticed. The mind narrows. The nervous system stays activated. Rest feels like danger. Stillness feels like death. And ironically, the very state we believe produces genius starts to choke the conditions required for it. Play, flexibility, insight, and creative risk. You don't get original ideas from a clenched mind. You get repetition, perfectionism, and eventually exhaustion. The neuroscience no one romanticizes. Here's the part that doesn't make it into inspirational quotes. Obsession is often driven by chronic stress chemistry, elevated cortisol, dopamine loops, and an overactivated threat system. That can feel productive in the short term. Stress does sharpen focus for a while, but prolonged obsession reduces cognitive flexibility, impairs long-term memory consolidation, narrows attention instead of expanding it, increases fear-based decision-making. In other words, obsession may help you work more, but not necessarily think better. Some of the most profound insights in science, philosophy, and art didn't come during frantic effort, but during rest, walking, bathing, daydreaming, or boredom. The brain needs oscillation, focus, and release to do its best work. A mind that never loosens its grip doesn't become brilliant. It becomes rigid. So why do geniuses look obsessed? Because many of them were. But here's a distinction that rarely gets made. They weren't great because they were obsessed. They were great and obsessed. And often the obsession came from elsewhere. Trauma, insecurity, a need for control, a need for validation, a fear of insignificance. The work became the outlet, not the cause. This doesn't diminish their achievements, but it does challenge the myth that suffering and imbalance are requirements rather than side effects. We don't need to inherit the wounds to inherit the wisdom. The danger of copying pathology instead of process. When we idolize obsessed geniuses, we often copy the wrong thing. We copy the sleeplessness, the isolation, the self-neglect, the intensity. But what actually produced value wasn't the imbalance. It was sustained curiosity, deep practice, long-term commitment, willingness to revise, tolerance for uncertainty. Those qualities don't require obsession. They require presence. You can practice deeply without destroying yourself. You can commit without collapsing your life into one dimension. But that version doesn't look as dramatic, and drama is what sells. The quiet power of balanced intensity. There's a form of intensity that doesn't get much attention. It's not frantic. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's the intensity of returning. Again and again. Over years, without needing the highs or the chaos. This kind of intensity is sustainable. And sustainability is underrated because it doesn't make good mythology, but it makes great work. Many people who last long enough to do truly original things eventually outgrow obsession, not because they become less committed, but because they become wiser about where commitment actually comes from. Obsession as a developmental phase. Here's a more nuanced take. Obsession may be a phase, not a requirement. Early in a journey, obsession can function like training wheels. It pushes you through resistance before skill and trust develop. But if obsession never evolves into something steadier, it stops being fuel and starts being friction. The problem isn't intensity. The problem is unexamined intensity. If you never ask why you're driven, the drive will run you. When obsession blocks genius instead of birthing it. Obsession narrows vision. It makes you defensive. It makes you precious about your ideas. It makes feedback feel like an attack. And genius, real genius, requires openness. The ability to abandon bad ideas, admit you were wrong, see beyond your original frame, let the work change you. Obsession says, this must work. Genius says, let's see what happens. One is rigid, the other is alive. The role of play. Yes, play. Almost no one talks about play when discussing genius, and that's a mistake. Play is where novel connections happen, rules loosen, fear temporarily disappears. The mind explores without agenda. Obsession hates play. Play feels inefficient, uncontrolled, unserious. But play is often where breakthroughs are born. If obsession is the clenched fist, play is the open hand. You don't sculpt with a fist. A healthier question to ask yourself. Instead of asking, am I obsessed enough? Try asking, am I present when I work? Do I return willingly or compulsively? Does this expand me or shrink my life? Can I rest without panic? Would I still choose this if no one ever praised me? These questions reveal far more about your creative health than how many hours you grind. Genius without self-erasure. Here's the reframe that changes everything. Genius isn't about how much of yourself you sacrifice. It's about how fully you bring yourself. A regulated nervous system, a curious mind, a body that isn't in survival mode. a life that has room to breathe. That doesn't make you less serious, it makes you more available to insight, depth, and originality. So, is obsession necessary? No, but devotion is. Devotion is obsession's wiser sibling. It's steady, not frantic, focused, not desperate, committed, not compulsive. Devotion says, this matters to me. Obsession says, I am nothing without this. One creates from fullness, the other from fear. The real imbalance we don't talk about. The imbalance isn't a lack of obsession. It's the belief that your worth must be proven through suffering. Once that belief loosens, something surprising happens. The work often gets better, clearer, bolder, more honest. Not because you care less, but because you're no longer trying to save yourself through it. If your drive feels heavy, anxious, or punishing, listen to that. It doesn't mean you're not meant for greatness. It may mean you're meant for a different relationship with your work. One where intensity is guided by awareness, where depth is supported by rest, where genius isn't extracted from imbalance, but expressed through wholeness. You don't need to be consumed to create something meaningful. Sometimes, the most radical thing a creator can do is stay intact.